Hi everyone, welcome to Art with Miss Arena. So what I'd like to do with you today is a drawing exercise. Great thing about doing a drawing is we don't need very much. As long as you've got a pencil, an eraser, a sharpener, and some kind of paper, you're all set. It doesn't have to be fancy sketch paper, it could be computer paper, anything else you have at home. What I want to do is have you choose two things from your kitchen. A man-made object, like a cup or a bowl, for example, would be good. Something without too many markings on it. We don't want it to get distracting. I really want to kind of show you guys how to break down a shape like this so that you can look at it and draw it the way that you see it. And the other thing I want you to choose is something that is organic. So a fruit or a vegetable would be a good choice. I'm going to give you some tips and tricks. It doesn't, of course, have to be an apple, but anything that you're looking at, you're going to have some of the same elements that you need to look for. It doesn't really matter what your subject is. So starting with the cup, what I need to do first is figure out where the middle of the cup is. I'm drawing something that's symmetrical, so I've got to measure out each side. So that's the first thing I did. I drew a middle line, and then I made sure that the line on each side of that middle line is equal. Sorry for the blur. The next thing that I'm doing is figuring out how tall that cup is compared to how wide it is, and that's why I've kind of put that mark there. So I'm just drafting out the overall height and the width of the cup. So I want to make sure I kind of get those. And how did I do that? I just checked it with my pencil. So I kind of held the pencil up to the cup to see, okay, well, this is this long. Let me flip the pencil up, and it looks like it's, just a little bit more than the width. So the bottom is a little bit shorter than the top. Next thing I have to do is kind of see what the angle of the cup is. Remember, the cup I'm drawing has an angle, so I kind of want to check that angle. What do? Again, I use my pencil as a tool, kind of just look at the cup, twist my pencil to see what that angle would look like. It's a little bit slight. And those lines that I drew to start give me kind of a foundation or a box that lets me check the size of everything. So when I drew out those angles, I had to make them into a triangle, and I checked those shapes. What am I doing now? I'm drawing a little curve on the bottom, because even though a cup sits flat on the table, the bottom is not flat. It's actually a circle. So when you put it down on a table, it's got a curve to it. And whatever curve I have on the bottom has to match the curve on the top or the lip of the cup. Now here's another thing. When I'm drawing this kind of an object, the opening at the top, if you look straight down at it, it looks like a circle. But when I flip that or twist it or look at it from a different perspective, it looks more like an oval. So again, I had to check and see, well, how big is that oval? And what I'm doing here is drawing a rectangle that that oval will fit into. Yes, I checked it to see how tall it was compared to the rest of the cup. And you can use your common sense here. It doesn't have to be absolutely precise, but you can make comparisons and say, well, it looks like the opening is about half the size of the cup, and that will do. And again, in the middle of that rectangle, I'm drawing a line. That line is going to be the middle, and that middle line is going to help me draw a nice even oval. And because it's going to give me something to compare everything to. It's going to be easier to see if my shapes match if I draw them inside of those rectangles that I created. So there we go. So I'm drawing those out. I'm checking what's left over. Do they match? They look pretty good. Yes, I'm okay. These are very traditional steps for how to measure something. And yeah, you can just look and make judgments based on what you see, but this is a more precise way to do it. But what I really want you guys to do is just get yourselves drawing. So whatever method you use, if you find this to be a little too much, that's okay. You can just kind of use what you find to be useful to draw your object, and then do your best by looking at it and just making some comparisons and seeing what's bigger than something else, what's smaller, what do the curves look like, and just exercise that part of your brain that makes those kinds of comparisons. Right now I'm drawing the handle. The handle is kind of angular. It's not very curvy. So I'm just checking to see where does it come out from the cup. Is it close to the top? It doesn't stick out past the top. It's a little bit underneath it. So I made sure I put that in the right place. And now I've basically got all the parts of my cup there. So I'm erasing away those guidelines. And that's why I'm always saying, don't push hard. Keep it light so that you can erase away the things you're not going to need. Or if you have to make a change, you can make that change really easy. Okay, don't push so hard you're carving into your paper. What I'm doing right now is just adding a couple little details. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time shading and adding details to this cup. We just want to get a basic idea of what that shape looks like. So I'm just adding a rim. The cup isn't paper thin. It's got some thickness. So you're going to find that every cup has a rim or a thin kind of a line around it where you would drink out of. I'm adding a little bit of shading on the inside just to show this is inside, this is outside, and it adds a little bit of depth or makes it look a little bit more three-dimensional than just drawing the shapes. And then where's the darkest part? Usually you're going to find the darkest part is going to be where an object is touching the surface of the table. So right there for me is where it was darkest. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw in a little bit of a shadow to make it look like it's sitting down. I'm drawing a couple of the more obvious shadows that I see. Again, really lightly with my pencil. I'm just kind of going back and forth over those areas. And just those little bits of shade are going to give me a lot more to my picture that are going to make it feel a little bit more real. Okay, so now we're going to move on to something that's organic. I grabbed an apple, and what I want to do with this, again, this is a organic shape, so it's not as precise as the cup, okay? And you're going to find the same thing if you're drawing a bowl, same process. With the apple, all I'm wanting to do here is get a general idea of the curves and then check and see how tall is the apple compared to how wide it is. Now, the way I was looking at the apple is going to make that different. If you move it at all, it's going to change the whole thing. So you have to be very careful to keep the object you're looking at in the same place and also keep yourself in the same place. If you move, if you were sitting up straight when you started but then start kind of slumping down a little bit as you draw, then the way you see it, your perspective, is going to change. And so it's going to change the way you see the apple. So you want to kind of keep yourself still and put yourself in a comfortable position when you start so you're not moving too much. It won't take you too long to draw out a shape, but you've got to be mindful of how you're sitting and how you see that object before you get started so that you keep that same angle. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put in that little curve that I see where the stem comes out of. That's really the trick to getting a realistic apple. That stem, that location where that little hole basically happens is where all of the color kind of comes out of. If you look closely at an apple in particular, a lot of the color in the apple looks almost like it's radiating or coming out of that central part of the apple where the core is. So that's going to be really important for me to keep in mind when I add shading or color to this, is making sure that everything's kind of radiating out from there. So really all I'm doing is getting that stem in there. It's got a little bit of a thickness to it. I'm not shading a whole lot with the apple because I am going to add some color to this one. Okay, now I'm just identifying where it's going to be dark, where it's going to be light, where do I need a shadow, and giving myself a couple of very basic indications on what I want to do at this particular part of the process. Okay, now I'm going to be using watercolor pencils. Used those in my class before. I love them, they're great, but you don't have to use watercolor pencils. You could use any colored pencils, you could use crayons. If you have a lot of different shades of markers, you can use markers too, but you're going to need to have a couple of different colors if you do want to add color. If you don't have color, it's okay. You could always just try shading it a little bit with your pencil, find where the dark parts are, find what the light parts are, and see what you can do with that pencil. So what I like to do is just, if you are coloring, select the base colors that you're going to need. When I look at the apple, I see I've got kind of a bright red, I've got sort of a darker burgundy or maroon red. I don't just see red. Lots of times you look at an apple and you think, it's a red apple or it's a green apple, but they're usually kind of blended. There's mixed colors. So I'm going to go ahead and choose those that I see that really kind of stick out to me. This is a chance to stop and really observe the colors that you see. So when you select them, just make sure you get a good range. I'm going to give you guys a little tip here. This is an important tip. When you are adding shade, a lot of times the impulse or what you want to do is grab black. But usually when you're shading something, it's not going to look like a pure black. It's actually going to be like complementary colors. So let's say, for example, I want to add a shadow to something that's red. A lot of times I'm going to grab a greenish color to add those shadows. It might sound a little odd, but those two colors kind of cancel each other out and create a neutral dark color. So a lot of times artists, we don't usually use pure black, and that goes for painting or for apples. There's pigment is really dark, it's really intense, and you want to get more of a soft, subtle shift in color. You don't want a really harsh, sudden change. So, well, we can get more into that a little bit later. So I am going to speed things up as I add some color. So you'll kind of see things. I'm not moving this fast. It took me a little bit longer than what you're going to see on the screen. But I'm giving it kind of a once over. And you're going to see what I'm doing here with the pencil. I'm actually going to drag my lines pretty soon into that central part, or that little hole that we talked about. So it looks like it's sort of following the curve or the shape of the apple. And that gives it a lot more of a three-dimensional quality. If I just were to color it from side to side or up and down, it's not following the shape of the apple. And so it looks very flat. It looks more like a cartoon. It doesn't look natural. You want to really pay attention to the curve of whatever it is you're drawing. So when you color it, even if you're not doing really complex coloring, it's going to look really developed and really nice if you focus the attention on those details of how you're actually dragging the pencil, what line are you creating to have that pencil move into or move around the shape. So I'm not clearly drawing everywhere with the red. I'm picking out the areas where I see the most intense red, and I'm leaving kind of paler areas where I'm going to add a lighter gloss of red, or I'm going to add some yellows or some greens. You got to think ahead when you're doing art. If you jump in too quickly and you don't observe, then often we end up making mistakes that could have been prevented if we were just a little patient. So it's going to take you some time, and that's okay. It's a good thing. Allow yourself to really, really get to know what you're looking at. Something that happens when we're busy in our lives, we look at something and we very quickly process or label what we see. So I see an apple or picture of an apple. I have already an image in my mind of what an apple looks like. And so my brain kind of projects the image, or it makes me, it's like, okay, apple, apple, here it is. It's a simple picture. But when I look at a particular, a specific apple, or any piece of fruit for that matter, I start noticing very specific things about that piece of fruit. At this point, I'm adding a very light wash of water on top of the watercolor pencil. One thing that I just want you guys to observe, if you do happen to have these around, or if you're using watercolor paints, make sure that you're going slowly and just dragging over those areas that you really want to blend, and stop short. If you need to leave something that looks like it's a distinctive color, make sure you're not pulling other colors into it. So for example, I'm not just dragging all the way across my apple and bringing the red into the yellow, and otherwise they get all smushed up and I would lose those little bright highlights of color that I want to make sure that I keep. So go slow and make sure that your blending is done in such a way that you're making sure you leave the lights light, because it's going to be really hard to go back and add those in again. The same is true if you're just using regular colored pencils to shade this in. If you push really too hard and too dark with those darker colors, with the reds, for example, if you're doing something like this, you're not really going to be able to lift them enough to correct it so much. You could try, and it might be somewhat successful, but it will never be as vibrant as it could be as if you just left those areas alone, or just made sure that you saved those spaces for the brighter highlights. So patience is really key, especially when you're doing these kinds of observational things. Now, if you didn't have something to look at that was three-dimensional, yeah, you could use a picture. But I would encourage you as much as possible, if you want to get really, really good with your drawing skills, to use things that you're looking at directly. It's different. When you look at something that's flat, it's kind of already flattened out for you. It's sort of already done for you. Just keep looking at the picture. The picture is not going to shift. It's not going to change. But it's more of a beneficial, or it's better for you as an exercise to look at something that's sitting in front of you, really observe it, and then take your time to do it. And something that you might just see as an everyday thing will suddenly take on
kind of a new value for you. You might find that it's actually something that's really interesting. And that could go for anything around your house. You might find interesting objects that have been collected by your family that you just kind of have hanging around that are familiar to you, but are actually really cool and really very interesting to look at. So you don't have to stop at the apple or at the fruit or at the thing you find in your kitchen. If you find something else that you think is really cool and interesting, take a look at it. Try and draw it. Make some comparisons. See how you can get that thing translated onto paper, and it might be a really, really great experience for you that maybe you can share.
Lastly, remember that every drawing and every piece of art you make is important. So even if it's not your favorite drawing, your favorite work of art, it still matters. It's still going to count the next time you draw. And if you don't like what you did at first, you can always try again, do another image, step back from it for a little while, and then come back and take a look, and you'll be surprised how much you can see. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.